Hello, everyone. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. We are starting again a new session of the People's Migration Challenge. My name is Elena Olea. I'm the Associate Director for Programs at Alianza Americas. We are one of the organizations that has been convening this incredible round of conversations which started on February 2021. And the rounds have continued one after another. As many of you are aware of, this round of conversations have specifically addressed 5 topics, and those are migration, COVID-19 and a new social contract, race and ethnicity on migration, regular pathways and irregular migration, detention and return, and climate change and migration. We decided to convene conversations on these 5 topics because we believe that these topics are crucial for us, key elements that we want to bring forward into the public discussion around migration. And in some aspects, we're also sometimes dissatisfied, frustrated in terms of where the conversation is going. And we're actually hoping that through this round of conversations, we can push the discussion forward. And we have one round after another. For each specific round, we try to invite different speakers, hoping to hear from different perspectives, from civil society, from governmental officials, from local governments, from United Nations agencies. And we are really very much satisfied in terms of how this effort has been going forward throughout this year, as I said. Today, we are beginning our new discussion on regular pathways and irregular migration. And it is with great pleasure that I would like to introduce the moderator for today's session, Pablo Rojas Copari. Pablo Rojas is a senior research officer at the International Organization for Migration in its headquarters in Geneva, Switzerland, where he leads the technical research assistance to the field. Prior to this position, Pablo was working as a migration advisor for the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, as a third secretary in the Irish Ministry for Foreign Affairs, and a senior policy and research officer for the Migrant Rights Centre Ireland. Before passing on the floor to Pablo, I would just like to remind everyone that we have interpretation available on English, French, Spanish, and Arabic. So please choose the language you feel most comfortable speaking or listening to, and the icon is the globe that is in the bottom of the screen. Hay interpretación a español, francés, inglés y árabe.
So there is interpretation into English, Spanish, French, and Arabic. You can use the world sign at the bottom.
But the icon is there. Pablo, thank you for your moderation today. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Elena, for the introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. It's a real pleasure to be asked to moderate the session in today's conversation. I do know how important these dialogues are, and as Helena stressed, how important it is to take time to have a conversation on those blockages in terms of migration and migrant rights. In particular, I'm very happy to be asked to moderate the session on regular pathways and irregular migration. That are 2 topics that I have, in my previous experience, dealt with a lot, particularly when I was working for civil society organizations. I'm also extremely happy to share the panel with 3 excellent panelists, that Mrs. Nahida Soban, Mr. Benny Ramdani, and Mrs. Claudia Pereira, that I will introduce in a short while. I guess you are familiar with how these sessions work, how these conversations work, but I will run over very briefly again to outline how we're going to proceed, just to make sure that we can make the most out of the conversation today. I will firstly, very briefly, I don't want to take a lot of time, the spaces for the panelists and for yourselves, but I will briefly introduce the theme of today's conversation, based on the brief that have been prepared by the organizers, before giving the floor to our three panelists to react on the themes from their own perspective and their own views. I will follow that with two questions. So I'll break that maybe in two rounds of moderated questions, in which I will ask our panelists to basically build on each other's answers, build on each other's contributions, and so to create a synergy in terms of where this conversation is going to lead us to. And finally, after these two rounds, I will open the floor to you all here today, hoping to get your interactions. Whether it would be nice if you could indicate by raising your hand on Zoom, or you can put it on the chat if you prefer to just ask a question on the chat. I will do my best to keep an eye at the same time in the moderation and on the questions being put in the chat, and your interventions as well, which of course will be noted and reacted by our panelists today. So without any further ado, let me just introduce briefly the theme of today, today's conversation, which is that of regular pathways and irregular migration. Particularly, I think it's timely to reflect on these two topics, based on two major events in the past couple of years. One is the adoption of the Global Compact for Migration, and as you all know, the Global Compact for Migration specifically calls for more regular pathways for migration, has a focus on regular, safe and orderly migration. And as part of that, of course, it comes with dealing with the issue of irregular migration. By that, we mean also ensuring how we can afford rights to those who are irregular migrants. But the second event that, of course, has had a huge impact on this particular theme has been the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm sure you hear this all the time about how COVID-19 has changed this and that, but it is true that the levels of mobility restrictions that were experienced during the pandemic, and that, as you have probably all noted in the past week, are not gone yet. So mobility restrictions continue to shape migrants' journeys, the ability of people to migrate. These restrictions inform who can migrate and who cannot migrate, under which conditions they can migrate or not. Unfortunately, these restrictions have also proven to be a setback for our work, our collective work on promoting and asking for greater regular pathways for migration. These restrictions have also meant that there has been an increased use of irregular pathways. In many times it have been at a high cost, including the life of migrants. And I think it's important that we have this conversation about how do we respond to pandemics and all of that without necessarily encroaching on people's right to migrate or people's ability to migrate in a safe manner. Within the topic that we're going to discuss today, we're going to look at 4 key themes, or key sub-themes to be more precise. The first one being rights-based and inclusive migration governance. So how can governments promote migration governance, particularly in the context of the GCM and advocating for safe, orderly and regular migration? while at the same time acknowledging the rights of those who are in an irregular situation. So particularly here, I would like the panelists, if possible, to touch upon two different two subtopics. One is the issue of the criminalization of irregularity. How do we address that? And how do we ensure that irregular migrants can access their basic rights all throughout the process, in spite of their irregularity? So as you know, I mean, it's needless to say in this context that irregular migrants have the same rights as most people when it comes to accessing healthcare, shelter, access to protection, and many other more. Yet we know that very frequently those rights are either denied or constrained. And on the second topic I would like to discuss is creating more regular pathways. I mean, I guess that has always been the buzzword in the conversation around migration governance in the past years, including in the lead up to the GCM. But what exactly do we mean by regular pathways, and what do we ensure that what are the blockages that exist at the moment in creating these regular pathways, and how do we ensure that these regular pathways come with rights, that we're not talking that in exchange of more regular pathways we're not compromising on the rights of migrants in terms of their labor rights, the right to permanency, and so on, particularly as we see a surge in temporary migration schemes, and the limitation of rights to family reunification, and the limitation of rights of certain groups such as international students, and so on. On the third theme or subtopic, we would like to discuss the issue of local governments and what exactly is their role or how they meet migrants' needs. As we know, much of the migrants' experience is a local experience, so they are citizens of their municipalities first and foremost. We have a lot of good examples of how municipalities have come to the assistance of undocumented migrants by providing them sanctuary or by affording rights to housing and other forms, sometimes being at odds with the national government or the regional governments. I guess maybe the discussion on this theme is like, how can we harness that, the power of local governments? How can we work with local governments to make sure that they are our key allies when we do national and regional advocacy? And here again, I would like us to keep in mind the great initiatives that were put in place during COVID-19 and how many local governments went a step further than the national and regional governments, and when it came to the assistance of migrants, including undocumented migrants, when it came to providing financial assistance or providing healthcare and other needs. And the final point, the final theme for today's discussion, it's building on this, is how do we integrate temporary or emergency policies into more long-term mechanisms, or how do we establish them either in law or in practice, or preferably both? As you know, we have seen a lot of very positive measures being implemented during COVID-19 by many countries. I'm sure Mrs. Pereira will mention some of the great examples that they have in Portugal when it came to the regularization or whatever, or I will let her phrase it herself, but the access to rights for undocumented migrants during the COVID-19 pandemic. We have also seen other countries in Asia, such as Thailand, for example, or in South America, for instance, such as Colombia, and the Dominican Republic, being triggered to answer to this unforeseen circumstance. Sorry, and a lot of very positive, unique responses were generated and were put forward. So the question here is, what's our learning from this? What's our learning from this pandemic, which is far from over yet, but what's our learning so far? And how can we embed this learning into our policies? How can we advocate for more responsive policies, and how can more rights-based policies? So I think I have covered the theme of today with these 4 subtopics that I will just repeat the headings again. So rights-based and inclusive migration governance, creating more regular pathways, local governments and meeting the needs of migrants, and integrating temporary or emergency policies into long-term mechanisms. Now, as I said before, I will perhaps pass on the floor to our panelists. So for their reactions first on the themes, on the broad topic, and in these subtopics and the subthemes. I will be introducing them one by one. Okay, and I will start with Mrs. Nahida Soban, Mrs. Nahida Soban is a career diplomat working in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Bangladesh since 1995, and she's currently working as the ambassador to Jordan, Palestine, and Syria. In the past, she has been the Director General of the United Nations and Human Rights Wing of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Bangladesh until January 2020. In that capacity, she was in charge of international peace and security, human rights, humanitarian issues, including those of Rohingya, disarmament treaty bodies, etc. She was a member secretary of the National Task Force on Implementation of National Safety on Refugees and Undocumented Myanmar Nationals, which is responsible for formulating policies and implementation of the strategies and policies on Rohingya issues in Bangladesh. In her previous experience in the permanent mission of Bangladesh to the UN offices in Geneva, she was in charge of human rights and migration issues. During her stay in Geneva, Mrs. Soban, as the only member of the Bangladesh delegation at expert level on human rights issues, she worked closely with the Human Rights Council and its mechanism, as well as with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. She served as a member of the working group on situations of the complaints procedure mechanism of the Human Rights Council in 2011. On behalf of the government of Bangladesh, she led intense negotiations on a number of resolutions at the Human Rights Council, including the resolutions on human rights and climate change, which took place between 2012 and 2016. During her stay in Geneva, she represented the country at the Global Forum on Migration and Development as the focal point for Bangladesh. In 2013, from Geneva, she served as a coordinator for the UN-led Global Leadership Consultation Meeting on Population Dynamics in the context of the post-2015 Development Agenda, and at the Global Expert Meeting on Migration in the post-2015 Development Agenda, which were held in Dhaka, Bangladesh, in 2013 and 2014 consecutively. In particularly resulting in the inclusion of migration as a theme in the Sustainable Development Agenda of 2030. Mrs. Nahida Soban, it's a pleasure to have you with us. I'll give you the floor now.
Thank you very much, Pablo. I don't know if you can hear me clearly. Is it okay? Great, good to know. So a very good rainy afternoon from Amman to you all. Nice to see the very rich panelists, and I'm honored to be here with you all today. Thank you for inviting me. You have mentioned the basic 4 points of today's discussion. I'll try to be very briefly give you some of my thoughts on the areas of the subtopics that you have mentioned, Pablo. Firstly, to talk about rights-based and inclusive governance. And I think that it is extremely important, because what we always forget about when we deal with migration, we say in Bangladesh, and I would say that most of the countries of origin would like to see it more as economic and development perspective. But here, I think what we need to do more is to include the rights-based approach. And that's what I think GCM was all about. We do have one migrants' rights convention, which is the Convention on Rights of the Migrant Workers and their Family Members. But you can see that majority of the, not majority actually, whole of the countries of destination are not state parties to that convention. So we always try to shy away from talking about the rights-based approach or the rights of migrant workers. First of all, we need to really recognize that they are human beings, not just a product. And secondly, the rights that needs to be ensured as a human rights. And it can be done in the light of UN Declaration on Human Rights, Universal Declaration on Human Rights, and also the Vienna Program of Action, VDPA. We had a declaration and program of action on the human rights. But it would be really nice to see, to have the Convention on Migrant Workers, becoming a universal document, universally accepted, and there can be other protocols to that in terms of their movement. So that's the part I would say that we can take up, and we need to push for it forever globally. And there is a big, I would say, role from the international organizations like yours, and also the United Nations while advising other countries. And certainly we have IOM and ILO that work on migrant rights and migrant workers. But unfortunately, I actually haven't seen any UN organization coming strongly advocating or advising countries to become a state party to this rights-based convention, or talking about any other new convention or protocol that would ensure the rights of the migrant workers, starting from their origin, during their transit or movement, and also in the countries of destination. I have always advocated that the regular path is a very good response in curbing trafficking, smuggling, and all the irregularities that we see in migration. And here I think that we need to promote some bilateral government to government discussions and bilateral agreements on MOUs on that, because I think it works very well. I am telling it from my experience in Jordan. With Jordan, we have an MOU, Bangladesh and Jordan, we have an MOU on the movement of migrants coming from Bangladesh to Jordan. And I think it works rather well. If we don't have anything bilaterally, then it's the migrants are in nowhere. They don't have any platform from where they can ask for things, or from where they can have their rights and also their work environments ensured. So I think it is something we need to look into, to encourage more countries to engage on bilateral agreements like that, whereby you can create more regular paths. If you control the regular paths, then you will always be having issues like trafficking, smuggling, and all kind of irregular ways of looking into working. Both for the rights-based approach, and when we talk about the inclusive governance, and then coming to the third point, which I see as integration and engaging with the local government. In integration, be it the circular migration, small, short-term migration, or be it long-term migration, it is a very important part, because even if you look into the economic and development issues, when you look at the workers, if you do not ensure the workers' well-being, and the workers, be it the local workers, be it the foreign workers or migrant workers, if you do not ensure their welfare, you cannot expect to have more outcome. You cannot have to expect to have the workers' output to be, to maximize the output of the workers. So this is something important, and integration can play a very important role in that. And in that way, I think it is also very important to play a role in integration between the foreign workers and the local workers, so that there is no feeling of we are they among them. From our embassy, we have been trying to do it in the some of the factories where Bangladeshi workers and other foreign workers are working. We have been trying to do some, competitions like cooking competition, because we have majority of women here. And very recently we had a cricket match between the workers, which included all, Jordanians, Indians, Bangladeshis, Pakistanis, all Sri Lankans, all workers together, just to have a friendly match among themselves. And it was a fantastic day for me personally as well, when I looked at them playing, and the kamahaderi that I saw among them. So these are small events, but it can be more systematic way. And certainly it's not only about the local government, but I can tell you that it should be these integration programs and all over that you talk about, it should include the employers particularly, to engage the employers to help the governments and the local governments in terms of integrating. And one thing that I have been trying to promote here is which we have already in the Global Compact on Migration, that is the post-arrival orientation for the workers. That is, I think, a crucial point we miss in all our conversations, in all our discussions. It is a very crucial thing to introduce and promote post-arrival orientation for all the workers in all sectors. We have introduced some with the garment factories here, because we have huge number of migrant workers in those factories, but we need to channel it to some other informal sectors like the agriculture and particularly the domestic sector, because in this particular region, you would see that a majority of challenges are faced by those who are working in the domestic sector as domestic aid. So we are trying, and we are working with one NGO based in Jordan, who work on women's issues, women's empowerment, and also they include the foreign women workers, and we are trying to work with them to find a way for creating post-arrival orientation sessions for the new arrivals coming from other countries. Here also, language should be one of the main area. And also in those post-arrival orientation, it should include the rights that they deserve, and also the laws, the local laws that they should not or cannot breach, but also the rights that they deserve. Lastly, the emergency policies, you have rightly mentioned, Pablo, that during the COVID time, we have seen a lot of countries, including the migrant workers in their policies. Jordan is one of those that included very well the foreign workers within their platform or within their activities on vaccination and all that. And very recently, Jordan has also announced ways of introducing vaccination for even the undocumented migrant workers. And this is a very big, important step, I would say, that Jordan has taken up, and they are working with IOM in this regard. And I would really like to applaud IOM and the Jordanian government, the Jordanian Labor Ministry, to come forward and recognize and allow the undocumented migrant workers to be inoculated. And it should be replicated as a good example around the world in other countries. But one thing that we need to do here is, as you have rightly said, Pablo, I fully support that there should be in place a very concrete system, a mechanism that would allow countries to take action in terms of emergency situations. I would stop here now, and I would love to come back again. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. That gives us a lot of food for thought, and then we can certainly discuss more on a few of those points that I have taken note of here. But before that, I'll give the floor to Mr. Just one second. Mr. Larso Simbolon, who is stepping up for Mr. Benny's Ramdani, who unfortunately couldn't make today's panel. So Mr. Laszlo Simbolon is a deputy chairman of Placement and Protection for America and the Pacific region, and he will today represent the National Board for the Placement and Protection of Indonesian Overseas Workers, or B2PMI. I will give the floor to Mr. Larso whenever you can I think you're muted. I think you need to unmute yourself. Let me see if I can unmute you. I cannot, but I have asked to unmute you. And now
Yes,
I think you should.
Yes, finally.
Good.
Yes. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Good evening, everybody from Jakarta. My name is Laszlo Simbolen. As introduced, I am representing our chairman, the chairman of National Agency for the Protection of Indonesian Migrant Workers, a national institution tasked as a implementing body for the placement and protection of Indonesian migrant workers. I was tasked only this morning, and I have prepared something. I have to apologize. I have prepared some materials, more or less what is the Indonesian new policy in the context of reforming, renewing our effort and management for the protection of Indonesian migrant workers. But again, as I followed listening to the conversation, I don't think this is something very much expected by the forum. Then let me try to join the conversation the best I can, relevant to the theme. However, someone representing a national agency tasked specifically for this duty for the protection of Indonesian migrant workers, I think the perspective must be very much heavy from the perspective of ascending country. That's number one. Number two, I appreciate, I think this is the first time our institution engaged, invited to this conversation. And this is a compliment. I would like to appreciate the regular, the host, especially, apa namanya tadi? People's Migration Challenge, yeah, for inviting us to this conversation. I've been informed that there will be an interpreter. Am I correct? Simultaneous interpretation. I wonder if I can speak in Bahasa Indonesia, or I'm sorry.
Unfortunately, unfortunately, the interpretation is only to Spanish, French, and Arabic. So unfortunately, we don't have interpretation to Bahasa today.
Okay, all right, fully understand. Well, 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 4 topics identified by the host for this conversation on rights-based and inclusive migration governance. From the sending countries' perspective, we have very progressive, revolutionary in nature new law as the foundation for the establishment of our agency, which is law number 18/2015, so less than 4 years now. The main reason, the main factor behind the enacting of this law is human rights. Our foreign workers in the past has been associated with people with victim of a number of exploitations in destination countries, but also here during the process of placement. Now it is the strong commitment of the government to have this management of placement and protections of migrant workers fully in full respect with human rights. And this sentiment is also a major task of this agency and the government of Indonesia as a whole, through diplomacy, through strategic communications, both with governments, partner in the destination country, but also with employers, with civil society, with all stakeholders in the country of destination, to make sure that due respect for human rights and all normative rights, entitlements of Indonesian migrant workers to be respected. And this is the sentiment also, I think, put forward by Indonesian governments in any forum, in any joint undertakings in the context of migration. Creating more regular pathways. Let me share also our experience in this regard as a sending country. We have this scheme. Again, I know migration is a very broad scope and issue, but I'm speaking, as I said, again, in the context of migrant workers. Migrant workers, as I am representing the National Agency for Protection of Indonesian Migrant Workers. Our policy here is to have a great shift as much as possible from sending informal workers into skilled and professional workers. And the statistics shows our performance in this regard. In the past, the gap between informal, low-skilled workers and semi-skilled, skilled and professional workers working abroad is decreasing. Now it's almost 50-50 before the pandemic, I should say. The pandemic somehow served quite a challenge for us. The number of people, number of migrant Indonesian overseas workers in this category of professional skilled is lower. Why? In the past, let me share with you, more or less 276 average we send our foreign workers abroad. But for the last 2 years, it's decreasing due to the pandemic. However, the policy, the strategy to put priority on sending skilled and professional workers abroad is still there. And I think this is one key solution, how to tackle with the irregularities, how to tackle with illegal placement of migrant workers from our perspective. The more you open possibility for people to work abroad in the formal sectors, the better in the context of tackling irregular and even non-procedural migration, especially from the context of migrant workers. Local governments to meet migrants' needs. This is, I think, we uphold. This is a noble idea. This is true. Local governments in the countries of destination should do their utmost to provide all necessary protections and entitlements of migrant workers, people living, working in their cities, their countries. Again, from the perspective of Indonesia as a sending country, we can witness how the central government and local government in Indonesia, hand in hand, for the better management of placement and protection of Indonesian migrant workers abroad. As mandated by the law I just referred to, law number 18, 2017. On integrating temporary or emergency policies into long-term mechanisms, I can only share here, we have been experiencing a number of challenges due to the pandemic. We almost every day we have our foreign workers deported back to Indonesia due to the lockdown, due to the loss of job, and this is something that part of our obligation to provide all necessary and maximum protection to them. Our wish, this can be a number of, I should say, due to the emergency situation, a better collaborations within countries of destination and sending countries should be in place, to ensure that handling of this exodus and forced return should be to the maximum extent conducted in full respect of human rights of the migrant workers. I think I'll stop here, and again, I thank you very much, and I hope my contribution not very much too much irrelevant to the discussion. I have misread the instruction, by the way. I have prepared something very substantive about our effort, our policy, our strategy in the context of sending, placement, and protection of Indonesian migrant workers. But again, I hope my contribution not very much away from the expectation of the host. Again, thank you very much. Stay healthy, everybody.
Thank you very much for your contribution. No, it was very much on point. And again, just like previous intervention, we'll have a chance to discuss further in a little while. But before that, I want to give the floor to Mrs. Claudia Pereira. Dr. Claudia Pereira has a PhD in anthropology with a postdoctoral degree in sociology. She's a researcher and invited assistant professor at ISCTE IUL, integrated in the Center for Research and Studies in Sociology. She's a member of the Sociology Research and Studies Center and was executive coordinator of the Emigration Observatory from 2017 to 2019. The Emigration Observatory has been responsible for the statistical report on Portuguese emigration produced annually for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Mrs. Pereira conducted research on the financial crisis and qualified Portuguese emigration to London and published the book Broken Lives, Portuguese Nurses Abroad. She's previously produced qualitative and ethnographic research in Goa, India, and on Catholic and Hindu castes and tribes. She coordinated a project on Nepalese immigration and agriculture in Portugal and labor exploitation in Audax IUL Entrepreneurship Center, financed by the High Commissioner for Migration. She's a director in the Post-Graduation in Humanitarian Action at ISCTE IUL and a representative of CIS IUL at IMISCOE, a network of excellence of migration researchers, and co-coordinated the Migrant Network, an international network of researchers and those responsible for public migration policies. She was invited as an expert to advise on capacity building projects for the International Center for Migration Policy Development, the ICMPD, funded by the European Commission. She has been working as a migration specialist on capacity building projects for governments of countries outside Europe, funded by the European Commission. She's an evaluator of European projects funded by the EC on migration. Among other publications, she co-organized the book New and Old Roots of Portuguese Immigration and Certain Futures at the Periphery of Europe. Her projects have prioritized the communication to the media and civil society, as well as cooperation with governmental and non-governmental bodies. Dr. Pereira, I give you the floor.
Hello, buenas, namaskar, bonsoir, from a sunny and cold Portugal. Many thanks for the invitation. I also thank the presentation to the moderator, Pablo Copari, and the insights of my two colleagues. I'm very, very glad that the government of Portugal can participate in this round, because it could not be more appropriate to identify areas of collaboration between government and civil society in promoting immigrants' rights. So many thanks for the invitation. I also like to congratulate the organization and to greet the speakers of this session and all those who are following us online. So migration, I'd like first to say the contribution to migration in Portugal, one of the contributions, and secondly, the important measures taken during COVID, which our aim is really to transform temporary measures in long-term measures. First, the contribution. So as we all know, migration plays a contribution both in terms of social, economic, cultural, and demographic. And I will stress the contribution to social security system. So according to the Migration Observatory in 2019, between the contribution of the migrants to the social security system and what they receive, the social security system in Portugal in 2029 benefited nearly 900 million euros. So I would like to repeat that the social security system of Portugal benefited nearly 900 million euros. So I look forward to know how is it in other countries, the contribution to social security system, because the immigrants in Portugal, like the Portuguese abroad, mainly are active population. So the majority are working. In Portugal, 81% of the immigrant population is working population. Secondly, our goal in the government is to include, our vision is to include migrants in all the government measures. So we do this by two strategies. First, not only to provide for access, but to ensure that the migrants are aware of the rights. So to ensure that information reaches them, because when we are not aware of our opportunities, we have no choice. And so we want the migrants to have choices. And secondly, to remove obstacles, particularly in terms of documentation, to access their rights. This is our vision. And this is our vision because our integration policies mirror the way that societies and decision makers perceive migration. And in Portugal, we work to widen the opportunities and reduce inequalities for all the residents in Portugal, including migrants. So as the Pablo Copari already mentioned, the Global Compact for Migration was very, very important for Portugal. And we were one of the first countries in the world to establish a plan for the Global Compact on migration. And I would like to highlight some examples that we implemented and directly really relate to the one-page paper. First, regarding the rights-based and inclusive migration governance, to the irregular migrants, we allocated the social security number. And this was very important because this was a measure to remove obstacles in the regularization process. And it has already covered since more than 1 year and a half, 230,000 citizens. And let me remind you that we are 10 million people country. Secondly, in terms of creating more regular pathways, I would highlight the successful negotiation of the labor mobility agreement with India to create regular and orderly and safe migration. Third, in terms of the local governments to meet migration needs, Portugal has a local network of integration centers. So we have centers to help migrants in their integration process, regardless of their legal status. And we have 137 local integration centers. And how do they work? It's an officer of the municipality who, besides his or her duty to to give information to all the residents, also has specific information for the migrants. And so half of these integration centers are in municipalities, 40% are in associations of the civil society, and 10% in universities, so that the migrants have specific information regarding their documentation. And fourth, and this is for us probably the most relevant, the concerning the four, integrating temporary or emergency policies into long-term mechanisms. 15 days after we had the COVID first confinement, we just issued a decree in which we granted regularization to all the migrants who had their process pending, so that any undocumented migrants had the same rights as any national. This was very important because it was the way that undocumented migrants could have layoff, support for unemployment, and any other social support that was so important at the time. And currently, 220,000 foreign citizens are regularized until their migration process is completed. So this was a way of leaving no one behind during COVID. Secondly, in Portugal, we have 87% of the population vaccinated, including undocumented migrants. And for this was very important the cooperation with the associations of migrants who helped us in reaching the information to migrants. In the High Commission for Migration, we translated information of COVID for more than 25 languages, but also the associations of migrants really helped in spreading the information and in assuring that migrants were having the vaccine. So the 87% of the population vaccinated includes migrants and undocumented migrants. These measures are important for everyone, not only for migrants, but all the residents in Portugal. And we are all part of the solution. And this is what we want, which is exactly the topic of this round, to transform temporary measures into long-term. So to construct structural responses that enhance integration and inclusion, and responses that at the same time can overcome vulnerabilities and reduce irregular pathways. We really want to develop, and we are developing an effort to strengthen the resilience of our societies and to ensure an holistic and strategy approach to migration. And in Portugal, we have demand of labor, so the migrants' contribution is deeply important. And migration is not only a driver of development for the destination country, but also for the societies of origin and transit. And so as Pope Francis, who just recently fled to Greece this week, and is with the migrants and refugees, it's really one of the developing and cornerstone topic of the world's future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Pereira. Thank you to all three panelists for all the very insightful points, and particularly on your specific takes on today's theme. I know that there are already a couple of questions on that, but so I will briefly, maybe to keep enough time to read, to let participants ask questions. I will maybe just shorten my my questions and then maybe do just one round of questions for the three speakers, and particularly on my reflections on this particular topic of today. And then maybe you can go one by one, and then I will get some of the comments from the chat box, and if there's anyone who wants to take the floor. I had taken note of particularly of two issues. One is when it comes to regular pathways, we've been hearing a lot about the need for more regular pathways, and most governments do seem to agree, both in countries of destination and countries of origin. Yet at the same time, they do not seem to materialize. We have recently seen some more humanitarian crises happening, for example, at the border between Poland and Belarus. We have seen continuous deaths at sea in the Mediterranean, both in the Western Mediterranean, the Central Mediterranean. We continue to see those in the Indian Ocean as well. I would like to get your views on from the panelists on what exactly do you believe are blockages to having these regular pathways established. I know that Ambassador Sohan mentioned bilateral agreements as a means to facilitate some regular movement across borders, but are bilateral agreements enough? And what is the role of like regional and global bodies? Particularly, I'm thinking of Mrs. Pereira and the role that the EU has to play in terms of making those regular pathways a reality in the European Union, particularly since this is a very common topic or a very common point that they like to raise at every moment. So that's my first point. So what do you think what are the blockages, and how can we work around those blockages? And the second point is in relation to the topic of regularization. So how do you see regularization fitting in this idea of creating more regular pathways? Are regularization measures enough? Are they necessary? I think there's, as far as I understand, there's a lot of division between those who believe that once-off regularization measures may be only temporary, yet at the same time advocating for regular pathways without acknowledging and dealing with large undocumented populations that are already in countries of destination are not the solution. So maybe if we can comment on how do regular pathways and regularizations combine and work together. And particularly, again, maybe I would like to hear on your specific country's experiences. So I don't know if I should, I will perhaps then start on the same order as before. So starting with Ambassador Sohan.
Thank you very much, Pablo. You put in a lot of flesh in the discussion. Thank you very much for that. I'll try to be brief on the regular pathway particularly, and you mentioned what is the main blockage in it. For me personally, I think the main challenge for creating a space for the regular pathway would be a political will. We forget that migration is also a demand-driven process. So there is a demand. That's why you have a huge number of people coming in, and countries tend to, forget that when it comes to the, within the governments, when it comes in the discussion of the governments. Even during the COVID-19 situation, we can see a lot of countries struggling with their, workers in the health sector. There is still no recognition of that. And there are a number of countries that can provide globally health sector workers. So I think it's the main challenge, I would say, is the political will and recognizing the fact that migrants contribute. And a lot of countries I can tell that a lot of countries grew up and a lot of countries developed with the help of the migrant workers, both blue-collar job workers and white-collar job workers. That I would say a major challenge, and I fully agree with you. It can be bilateral, but also there is a good space and for the global perspective, and also the regional organizations, and also the global organizations, UN agencies, to work on it, to create greater platform that can feed into the bilateral arrangements. And that's where I think it's very important to look into it. I have seen a lot of even UN agencies relevant, they talk about all these, but when it comes to, you know, talk about facilitating migration, but majority of the time, migration of the returnee migration. But I haven't seen any of the UN agencies or any of the global organizations working on creating regular pathway. It can be even, I see a lot of opportunities, even WTO can play a part in that, but we miss that part. So I think, yes, we all have our role to play, the regional organizations. I haven't seen ADD or Colombo process working much on that. We always tend to work, you know, around the main thing that needs to be discussed, around the white elephant in the room, but it will never take us to reach us to our goal. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Soban. I will pass on to Mr. Laszlo. I don't know if Mr. Laszlo is still there. Oh. Do you need help to unmute? Maybe I can. I can't unmute you, but there's a microphone at the bottom. Yes, I think you can. I think we can hear you now.
Yeah, I think it takes a few minutes, few times before it. All right. I think, if I'm not mistaken, the question is how to optimize the regularization. Am I correct?
So two questions. So first, I think maybe if you want to address that particular one. So how does the regularization of undocumented migrants fit within our broader aspiration to create more regular pathways for migration, and whether they work together or whether they are they conflicting, and an overall your overall thoughts on what are current blockages in creating more regular pathways for migrants across all skills levels. Thanks.
All right. Yeah. I think I would like to echo the sentiment expressed by Ambassador Bangladeshi Ambassador Soban. The collaborations between country of origins and country of destination is key. Migrations, especially migrant workers, choose to migrate to other countries, should not be considered only from the perspective, the interest of the migrant themselves. It is the contribution of migrant workers, both for the country of origins. Yeah, in our context, they are supporting the development of our economy at local level, but also national level, but also great benefits in the country of destination. More and more awareness on this and joint effort to ensure regular migrations, I think should be enhanced. Number two, from our experience, the government by our national law, it is our duty to open possibilities. Again, I'm sorry, I can only speak in the context of our agency task, to open possibilities as much as possible for our prospective migrant workers to work abroad with the maximum protections of the rights abroad. So apart from the traditional country of destinations, we are striving in the context of collaborative and joint undertakings together with prospective country of destination to ensure the process of placement, to ensure the fulfillment of their rights is conducted to the most extent possible in the country of destinations. In the meantime, we are aware have to do our best to tackle this practices of irregular placement in our term. In our case, we established a national task force in close collaborations with our law enforcement institutions, but also local governments, but also stakeholders in the country of destinations to ensure more and more, I'm sorry, I should say, to ensure that irregular, non-procedural process of migration should be minimized. And this task force is working, and process of collaborations with all stakeholders here in Indonesia and abroad is part of our job in this institution, in this national agency. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Laszlo. Now on to Dr. Pereira. Before I pass the floor to you, maybe because I have been receiving a couple of questions, so maybe if that's okay, and in the interest of time, I'll change a little bit the question that I'll be asking you to respond, because I have two questions that are specifically addressed to you, and that'll give us more time for broader comments afterwards. So the first one is that in relation to the 900 million euros contribution by immigrants to the social security system of Portugal, what period was that for, and does that include contributions by Portuguese immigrants working abroad to Portugal's social security system? So not through remittances, but like through social security contributions or is this entirely from migrants working and living in Portugal? And the second question is to hear a bit more from the Portugal experience in the context of human and labor rights and of irregular migrants and facilitating regular pathways. And would you believe that the Portugal's response and the multiple ways in which Portugal facilitate either the regularization or facilitating people coming out of irregularity and into regular status, is that due to the fact that Portugal is a small country and because it faces demographic challenges, or is it also to do with labor market forecasting? I mean, how do you explain that Portugal is somehow at odds with the attitude of other countries in Europe and elsewhere? Thanks.
Many thanks. So the first question, it is exactly 884 million euros. It refers to 2019. So only to immigrants, not the Portuguese abroad. So between what the immigrants contributed to the social security system, which was 995 million euros, and what they receive in social support, which was 111 million euros. The social security system of Portugal benefited 884 million euros. And I strongly recommend that other countries can also see this indicator of the social security system in their own countries. We have an annual report of the Migration Observatory of the High Commission for Migration. I just left the link, although it's in Portuguese, but you can see this indicator there and many others. And as I said, this is very easy to explain. Most of the Portuguese abroad are working. Most of the Bangladeshi abroad are working. Most of the Indian, French, English abroad are working. In Portugal, it's the same. 81% of the immigrant population is working population. So it's normal that the balance is positive for the social security system. Secondly, in Portugal, as I said, we are a 10 million country population, half of the population of Delhi. And so we are, the immigrant population is 7%. And we really, it's very important, the contribution of the immigrants. We see migration as a natural and positive phenomenon, also because Portuguese have been migrant for more than 1 century in several countries. So almost every family has a family member or a friend who has migrated to another country. In that sense, we see migration, it really plays a key role in the fulfillment of job roles and the economic, social and demographic development. The population of Portugal would be much smaller and older if it was not the contribution of the immigrants. Then thirdly, we have a whole of government approach for migration. And this was and I really would like to stress that the Global Compact for Migration of the United Nations was very important. Because of the Global Compact for Migration, 4 state secretaries, we met every month. So foreign affairs, home affairs, work, labor, and ours presidency to deal with the measures to include migrants in all the government measures. And then the public institutes also met every month. So we really developed a network, and Global Compact of Migration was really the key factor in this. We already had a network, but it became much more stricter. That is why that in March, in the first confinement, in the same month, we issued a decree that assured that no one will be left behind, and the immigrants who had their process pendants would really not be left behind and had the same access to rights as any Portuguese. And thirdly, fourthly, it's very important to have a network with the civil society to let us know what is missing. In this sense, the High Commission for Migration has been developed this network pretty much, and that's why we renewed the decrees to regularize migrants 3 times. And we also include in the documents which we extended validation of all documents in Portugal until December 2021, and including passports and residence titles all became valid, so that no one would be prejudiced by the COVID. Then fifthly, for the first time, the government created a state secretary for integration and migration. And we are in the Ministry of Presidency, which means that we are this enables us to interact with all the other ministries, because migrants subjects are not individualized. They are a matter of education, so we interact with the Minister of Education. It's a matter of labor and social security, so we interact in the Ministry of Presidency with the Ministry of Labor and Social Security. Very important, it's a matter of housing. We interact with the Ministry of Housing. That is why we are in the Ministry of the Presidency. And this is very important to integrate migrants in all relevant paths of their pathways. I think I answered all the questions, but if I have not answered, please just let me know.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pereira. Actually, at this stage, I think we still have about 15 minutes, maybe a bit more. I would like maybe to open the floor for some other questions that maybe, or if someone wants to take the floor, please, if you just want to raise your hand, and I will, I see that Smriti Lama, I see a hand is up. I don't know if you would like to take the floor and ask your question directly, whether it is one panelist or to all of them, or Smriti? Yes, you're muted. You need to mute. You need to unmute yourself.
Yeah, now it's working. Thank you so much. First, it's my great pleasure that I'm just participating in this very important and a very insightful discussion on migration. I'm very, my query to the Subhana ma'am, thank you so much for that insightful, just information that you have given. As a part of GFund, we have been also working with the Jordan migration, as we are working in the safe migration issues from the GFund. And we just started working in the migration. Now we have been raising issues of G2G, government to government MOUs or things. We started T2T also. If there is a trade union, we have signed MOUs with them. So in Jordan, JTGCU, Garment Workers Union, we just started working with them, signing MOU. My query is with the Subhana ma'am, what do you think, as you have been working and you give us such important information, which is very interesting for me. So what do you think about, as we have been talking about blockage of the regular migration, and more women are migrating through the South Asian, as we are in our part, we are a labor sending country. So what do you think about the possibilities of the SARC level collaboration or the standard contract as a labor sending country? Because as you mentioned about some of the good example that working together with the other countries migration also. So what is your thinking on that? Is there a possibilities of the standard contact of the SARC level for the safe migration? This is my query. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sriti, for your question. Sorry, Pablo, I just immediately jumped in.
Go ahead. No, please go ahead. Answer that question now. And I'll take
yes, no, just to mention, I would really love to see a SARC platform. SARC has in its convention and its outcomes has addressed trafficking very strongly. There is a convention on trafficking in SARC. But they have some language in some of the declarations on migration, but not as a whole, not as a group. I haven't seen SARC working on this. I would really love to see someday SARC working as a group within the Colombo process, or maybe outside the Colombo process, to create a platform for the migrants as a labor sending country. Thank you very much. It's not there yet.
Thank you. Okay, is there any other person who would like to take and make an intervention from the floor? Otherwise, I have some more questions in the chat that I may just ask to the panelists, but please, if you want to take the floor, just use the raise hand function. We still have a little bit of time. So I think there was one question in relation to, so it was particularly addressed to Latro in Indonesia, but maybe we can make it as a broader question about access to citizenship. The question in particular was, should Indonesia be granting citizenship to those refugees who are there for more than 5 years? But I think maybe in the broader question on this topic is, should we, what's our take on basically access to citizenship and residency? So what are pathways for permanent residency? I think maybe that goes back to the point that we were discussing earlier on, okay, regular pathways are good, but regular pathways need to lead to something more. So a set of rights, including rights to residency and citizenship. So Lazaro, I'll let you answer maybe that question, and then if somebody else wants to also give their thoughts.
Thank you, Pablo, and thank you for the question. Quite tough for me to answer this, but let me share with you. Indonesia is party to signatory party to the UN Convention on Rights of Migrant Workers and all members of their families. Also, we might not be signatory to the Refugee Convention, but I think our record of collaboration, support, and cooperations in the context of taking care of migrants, refugees, it's very much recognized. For instance, our experience to host and to provide all necessary support in the context of Indochina refugees in the past, but also today in the context of collaborations with international agencies, IOM, NetCR, and other international UN international bodies, I think well recognized. I'm not particularly knowledgeable about technicalities of 5 years, 10 years, and so on and so forth. But we, a very responsible member of international community, and we are a transit country in the context of migration as a whole. We are labor sending country in the context of migrant workers. But at the same time, of course, we do our utmost to provide all necessary obligations, protections for foreigners, foreign workers in Indonesia. And that's also part of the progress for national economy, progress for bilateral, regional, and multilateral cooperations. And I hope it helps a little bit to answer the question. Thank you.
Mrs. Pereira, do you want to maybe mention something on the topic of citizenship, or otherwise I have another person waiting for.
Yes, in terms of citizenship, just to wait that we have been making changes to citizenship law, which is very important. And the last 2 changes that we made, I believe they are very much important. So we have been in the process of transforming the citizenship law in Portugal more of a solo law. So nowadays, the children of any person in Portugal, including migrants, undocumented, as long as it is born in Portugal, it is considered part of Portuguese citizenship automatically. And this was not like that previously. Secondly, previously a migrant had to have 5 years of continuous legal residency to acquire Portuguese citizenship. And it had to be 5 consecutive years. Now it's 5 interpolated years. And this has made a major difference because, for instance, if a migrant has a labor contract that ends in 2 years and then is unemployed and cannot have a residence title, it will start again counting the 5 years from 0. And now we change that. It's 5 interpolated years, so it will not stop counting. And for us, giving this Portuguese citizenship is our main instrument to give migrants the same rights as any Portuguese.
Thank you very much. I have 2 people who want to make interventions from the floor, so maybe I'll take them both at once, and then I'll let the panelists respond. So, sorry, I muted myself. Michelle, do you want to go first?
Yes, thank you very much, Pablo, and thank you to all the honorable speakers for your really excellent interventions. I was wondering more of a reflection question, a little bit prompted by Ambassador Sobhan's comments earlier about the fact that we don't really see a lot of the UN bodies or other entities really promoting and discussing regular pathways, when at the same time we really need them. And I was wondering, maybe Secretary of State Pereira might be able to reflect on this a little bit within the European context, but I suppose all of you could as well in the global context. I mean, we've heard so much about Portugal's policies, which are really, really progressive. You know, regularization nowadays in the European context seems so different from a lot of the policies, to be honest, what the European Commission proposes on the Pact on Migration, which would increase detention and deportation. It almost seems like it's almost like the opposite. And I was wondering, does Portugal find any space in the regional context? So, I mean, we've heard so much in the whole webinar about the national context, rightly so, because we need to understand how these policies work in the national context. But if we, I think, collectively want to go towards the International Migration Forum in May and have all countries intervene, we most likely need to have discussions that go beyond the national, that exchange on the regional and that exchange on the global. So countries also have to feel open about discussing progressive policies. And so I wondered, first of all, in the European context, Mrs. Pereira, if you find that there's any opening within the European space to talk about progressive policies, to talk about your regularization, to talk about regular pathways that are not just for highly skilled migrants, but for all levels. So, I mean, that's kind of one question more for this European regional space, but I guess it's for all of you. Do you think that there's a way to then speak openly and objectively about a lot of your promising practices, even in the International Migration Review Forum, so that we can move beyond not talking about what is actually going on to more objective discussions? I think, you know, it was a wake-up call for all of us in the negotiations of the Global Compact, when a lot of governments, particularly in Europe, weren't aware of some of their own progressive policies on access to healthcare for undocumented migrants, even on regularization, and weren't really that open in the discussions, but we're slowly kind of over the 6 months of the negotiations starting to then refer to them. So it's more a question of how do you also see this beyond the national level? Thank you.
Hi again.
Yes, do you mind if I just get on John's question as well, so we can try to yes.
Yeah, thanks very much, Pablo. I'm John Bingham with the NGO Committee on Migration in New York. We have several colleagues with us on the phone today, and I've asked questions in the chat box, and Senora Pereira in particular answered a question with a tremendous insight into the role of migrants and contributions to social security. So not remittances, but social security. And that's an amazing contribution that I think civil society and others, governments on origin and destination sides of migration should take further in mind. Pablo, I mentioned how my own appreciation for your excellent framing of regularization. You know, this is not the first time I've come to one of these conversations on the People's Migration Challenge on regularization. I think it's one of the best. And the reason I come to these is to try and get fluent, with civil society, all of us, but myself, I need to get fluent in what we mean on regularization as well as regular pathways. And Michelle Lavoie and others help to make that clear because that is the cornerstone, to quote the Pope Francis, but the cornerstone of the Global Compact is regular pathways and regularization, even though the compact doesn't use the word regularization. So, Pablo, just to finish, a quick reflection on your excellent questions as you opened up the second round of this webinar. When you asked specifically about regularization, where do regularization programs fit? And I'll just note Michelle Lavoie is one of the world experts on this, more expert than some of the European governments that have them, as she says. It's the best kept secret of migration governance in some countries. and maybe in COVID time, but just a reflection in one sentence. I don't think we should ever talk about regular pathways without also talking about regularization. Now, they're different, but they're different in the way that twins sometimes are different. I'm a twin, I have a twin brother, and we're very different. But regular pathways and regularization are like what used to be called Irish twins. The brothers and sisters born more or less at the same time, but not on the same day. And sometimes they look a little bit alike, but they go together. They're Irish twins in migration governance. And I think we have to push them forward together. Lastly, even if regularization is never enough, it's necessary. It's necessary in pieces. It's our role in civil society to push for regularization to be as comprehensive as possible. It's one of the essential pieces of ensuring rights for irregular migrants or migrants who have fallen into irregular status. And Pablo, I know you know that from all the work you've done over the years, including with, I think, with PICOM. But thank you very much for this webinar. It helps us all to get fluent.
Thanks, John, for the nice words, and also for the nice roundup in terms of that. I agree with you that yes, they go hand in hand, and your allegory of the Irish twins might not be very mistaken here. Before I give the floor to the panelists, I also just want to maybe introduce a question that I saw here in the chat, because it's very relevant to maybe a bit of what Michelle was saying. So this is for Dr. Pereira. I mean, I guess it's part of what Michelle was saying. How do you see Portugal within the broader European family, so to say, where there's an increased secularization and weaponization, and what does Portugal do to gather allies within the EU to have more migration-based practices or rights-based practice beyond the actual one? So I guess that's maybe another one to ask. And then please take on the floor on all the different points that were raised. Maybe I want to maybe if I start by giving the floor to Ambassador Soban. I know she wants to.
Thank you, Pablo. No, on the regularization, it was really good to see and hear Michelle and John after such a long time. I was a little bit away from this path. And fascinating example of Irish twin, John. As always, it's really interesting to hear you. I would agree with you, John, very much, and Michelle, that it's not either or. It should go hand in hand, and regularization wouldn't inhibit regular pathway. That's how I see it. And at the same time, it gives a little more impetus for regular pathway. Because if you come through a regular pathway, you have the chance of regularization, and that maximizes the contribution of the migrant workers. Here I tell you, in the countries, because I'm in a country where it's not at all very possible for migrants to be regularized unless there is a huge amount of millions of dollars of investment. But you can see from the migrant workers, they can make small investments in the country of destination. If there is a chance of regularization, if they know that I have a possibility to stay here back for a longer time, I can have sort of like some future of my children here, they would be interested to contribute more in the development and the welfare of that particular country of origin. And that's what I see lacking here. And I can, do the comparison between how it works better with regularization in those countries where it exists, and also in the countries how it deprives the government and the local population of much more things being done if we do not have the pathway for regularization also. But it has to be, it is not either or, it has to go hand in hand, and it actually encourages each other. It's like a complementary to each other. Thank you very much.
Many thanks. Yes, I would like to thank the insights of Michelle Levoy and John Brinkman. Many thanks. So in the last semester, the Portuguese had the presidency of the European Union, and we were able to move forward on the promotion of migration. And in this sense, we strongly assume the government of Portugal as a progressive government in terms of migration, and in that way to inspire other countries. And we also strongly believe in a sharing of responsibility with solidarity. For instance, since the last 3 months, we already received and settled about 500 Afghans refugees, and we keep working, and always with a very humanistic and holistic position regarding migrants. At the same time that in Portugal, we have done a lot in concerning the rights of migrants. Still a lot has to be done, and we are very much aware of that. But still, we are also committed, and we were very committed to the consensualization between the member states for the adoption of the new Pact on Asylum and Migration to defend and promote the rights of migrants and refugees, and to ensure a more supportive and inclusive Europe where no one is left behind. We also, secondly, reactivated dialogue between countries to work towards integration policies and the recovery from COVID. Because I work in the integration policies, we are strongly committed to establish new pathways in that sense. And in the government of Portugal, but I think in the public policies in generally, our main aim is really to reduce inequalities. And to reduce inequalities, it's a path towards the realization of human rights. And that is what we have been working on actually since 2007. So in the last 14 years, when we had our first plan concerning the integration policies developed in Portugal. We also, in the Portuguese presidency in the European Union, welcomed the adoption of the action plan of the European Pillar of Social Rights, which, as stated by the Ministry of Labour, is a cornerstone in the affirmation of the European social model and the construction of a more social Europe. So to really include migrants in the construction of a social Europe. So in our vision, this is what we have been developing, again, to reduce inequalities and at the same time promote the equality of opportunities to everyone. And this is done by two basic mechanisms that demand a lot of work, especially of two kinds of work. Relations of proximity between the local government, the central government, and civil society, and to work in networks that are structured. And this is what we have been putting much effort. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Lazaro, would you like to maybe add some comments on these topics or any final comments? It should be at the very bottom.
Sorry, I know, but it took 3-4 times. Some technical problem here. I don't think I can add to the already very rich discussion on this topic. But the idea of regularization, if I may, personal opinion here, I think it's something very important to explore, to enrich. This can be an option available to all of us, as one of possible solutions to the complex problems of migrations. In a very ad hoc case, we do have some experience with our partner country of destination in this regard, to implement some sort of regularization, where undocumented migrants arrived at the country of destinations beyond their normal wish, in a very ad hoc special case. We do have an experience to regularize them. We use even the word calibrations, with the cooperations of our government and the government in these sending countries, and also employers, because I'm again talking about labor, talking about foreign workers, Indonesian migrant workers. But I think this is very great idea to be scaled up, to be explored, to be enriched as an option, as one possible solutions to this complex problem of migrations. If Pablo said just now, closing statement.
That's fine. Yeah, I mean, if you want to say final words, I don't think we were going to perform a closing statement, but sure.
Okay. Of course, I should not fail to thank you and to thank all the organizers and the fellow panelists for rich discussion. And this is my first experience with this kind of global forum of experts and senior representatives. We have not managed to introduce, to know who in the audience, but I'm sure they are all experts and people concerned to the development of global, national, regional, and global efforts to ensure to maximize regular migrations. On the part of speaking from Indonesian government, we stand ready. We do our utmost. We are an important sending country in terms of labor, but we develop from time to time our management of our migrations, migrant workers, especially. We do have mechanics from G to G to G2P or G2B. P here is can be private, can be large industry and employer, but also P2P, private to private. In this regard, the role of the government is to ensure the mechanics, the mechanisms, social protections, legal protections, verifications is to be respected to ensure that the migration should work positively, both for us, sending country, but also in the country of destinations. So again, thank you very much for the opportunity, and my apology for here and there might not be up to the expectation for the whole great discussions, and again, thank you. Keep in touch. I'll be very happy to be part of the discussion in the future. Yeah. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Lazaro. In the interest of time, and I'm conscious that we are a little bit beyond our closing time, I'll take one of the executive decision of abusing my moderator powers. There were like 2 questions in the chat, and I think I'll just answer them because I think they relate a little bit to each other, and I think they've been complemented by all the answers already. One was in relation to, well, it was more like a comment on talking about the criminalization of irregular pathways and how criminalizing irregular pathways result in more human trafficking and abuse of irregular migrants. And the other question was like, what's being done to stop irregular entry, or even though when this is facilitated by country officials and so on, and what can we do to avoid irregular entry? And I think the answer to both questions is going back to the purpose of our discussion today. You know, the only way that you're going to avoid irregular entry is by creating regular pathways, because and I think there's not only it's futile and useless to criminalize irregular entry, it's also in contravention of international law, particularly as it relates for people's needs to ask for protection, international protection, and so on. And indeed, I think we are all preaching to the converters here when we know that the criminalization of irregular entry will unavoidably result in more hardship for those who have no other means to migrate but using irregular paths. Before I give maybe the floor to Ambassador Soban and Dr. Pereira for just any final words, I just want to thank everyone. If I again maybe just want to make a final comment on the very interesting discussion that was had just now around regularization and regular pathways. I think it's something that we should continue to think more about and discuss more. I think ultimately, yes, in an ideal world, once we have regular pathways that come with rights, where people will not fall into irregularity, and the need for regularization will in itself solve. But the truth is that we need to not only we need to acknowledge that most of migration pathways that exist nowadays, both in the developing and in the developed world, are faulty. They're generally temporary in nature. They do not afford rights, and they place a burden on migrants themselves to make sure that they maintain their regular status in spite of things such as administrative issues or labor exploitation and so on. So the reality is that like not only we should be advocating for regular pathways, but we should be advocating with strong rights to residency in those regular pathways. So having said that, please, Ambassador Soban, if you want to have some final quick words.
Thank you very much, Pablo. First of all, I would like to thank again for inviting me to this wonderful panel. I'm really honored to be in the same panel with the Honorable Minister Pereira and also Laszlo. It is I'm really humbled. I just wanted to mention that when we started the discussion and when we, Bangladesh, proposed the Global Compact on Migration, the basic concept that we had in our mind was the rights-based approach to governance. And that we believed that this governance system, when we talked about it, it meant to create a system, a mechanism whereby we can create more, responsible way of regular migration. And that was the main idea that we had in our mind. It's a rights-based migration. It's a regular pathway migration for creating a system that would channel more regular pathway of migration. So that's what we had in our mind. So thank you very much for including me in this particular panel when we were discussing about regularization, regular pathway, and also the basic governance issues. I don't have anything more to add. But I also agree with you, Michelle. We always look up to the United Nations and the international organization. I personally have a lot of faith on that, but there are some lackings that I see from time to time. And this particular issue of migration, regular pathway, creating advocacy, awareness raising on regularization and regular pathway on migration, it is important that we need to see United Nations is stepping up more, international organizations supporting or advocating with the UN would make a lot of difference, and I look forward to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Dr. Pereira.
I also like to think it was quite a privilege to have such an insightful discussion. So I also like to thank the moderator, the Ambassador Naiba, Mr. Laszlo. And I think as a final word, what I would like to share is that to the insight to have informed public policies. If there is a field where there is a major difference between the facts and the perception is migration. And for that, it's very important to have accurate information. So I strongly advocate to have better migration policies based in facts. And it seems difficult, but it's not. Just in the social security system, to extract the contributions of migrants, whether by country of nationality or by country of citizenship. And any country can see what is the contribution of the migrants. And this is a fact that really informs public policies among other factors. Many thanks, and all the best for all the countries in this session.
Thank you. Laszlo, I think you already said your word, so thanks for that. I just want to thank all the participants. I, of course, want to thank the panelists for such insightful inputs and for having a very pleasant discussion among all of us. And yeah, apologies for not keeping to time, but I guess we were enjoying ourselves too much. And thanks again to the organizer for the invitation to moderate. It was a pleasure. So Helena, I let you close the session.
Pablo, thank you very much for an excellent moderation. We really have had a fantastic session today. Thank you to the panelists. It was very interesting to learn from your experiences and your perspectives on this issue. And we are really very pleased in terms of how this series has evolved throughout the year. We look forward to having all of you next Tuesday on our next conversation, which is going to be on climate change and migration. Thank you very much to everyone, and have a very good rest of your day.